Good morning. Today, Miss Nicole is going to read Ladder to the Moon. This is by Maya Sotoria and it's illustrated by Yuyi Morales. This was gifted to my daughter for her first birthday. This book is dedicated to my mother and my daughters. May we all continue to grow and learn. To my sisters, Elizabeth and Magali, and my brother, Mario Alejandro. Together we are stronger than we imagined. If you get a chance, Yuyi Morales, the illustrator of this book, she writes and illustrates a book called Dreamers. She talks about her experience with her sisters and her brother. One cool evening, Suhela asked her mama, "What was Grandma Annie like?" "She was like the moon," her mother replied, "full, soft, and curious. Your grandma would wrap her arms around the whole world if she could." Mama gave Suhela a hug. "You have Grandma Annie's hands," she said. Later, Suhela lay in her pajamas, the moonlight coming through her open window. She looked at her hands, front, side, and back, and wondered what else she had gotten from her grandma. As the night deepened and the crickets grew loud, Suhela wondered and waited. It seemed like something was about to happen. Then, as though in answer to her wondering, a golden ladder appeared at the edge of the seal. I wonder whose feet those are. There, right on the lowest rung, stood Sahela's grandmother, her silver-bangled arms outstretched and tinkling. "Do you want an adventure, my dimpled child?" Suhela nodded twice, the second time more certainly. Then she tossed herself out of bed like a tumbleweed and ran to the window. Together, step by step, they climbed that ladder in the path carved by the moon's glow. When we say rung, we are talking about the different steps of the ladder. It's spelled R-U-N-G, rung. Usually we would just call them steps, but the technical word for it is rung. From the top rung, Grandma Annie jumped to the moon first. She let herself grow wider and wider, wider than the biggest crater. Then Suhela jumped too, into Grandma Annie's soft, waiting lap. Grandma Annie wrapped her arms around Suhela's chest, taking the shiver out of the child. The two looked back toward Earth, and Suhela tried to be brave about feeling so far from home. "What fun!" said Annie. "What now?" asked Suhela. "Listen," said Annie. "Listen. The moon is a great place, it's true, but the songs of the moon are plenty. Some are plain and some fancy." But Suhela listened to them all, and through listening, she knew more than she had known before. With each new song, she smiled and felt stronger, until the edges of her smile nudged her Grandma Annie, and they two knew each other completely. Sometimes a smile is strong enough to do that. "I hear other voices," Grandma Annie said then. Together they gazed down at the earth below. A 50-foot wave was sweeping from the ocean to the land, and through swirling waters, swimmers struggled up towards the surface. Kick hard, Annie encouraged them. Swim! Tilting her head toward her granddaughter, she asked, "Shall we invite them to join us, little one?" "May we? We have lots of room," Suhaila responded. What's happening here? She looks worried, maybe scared. What do you think? Hmm. Annie nodded and let her voice drift down. "Come dance and get warm, babies," Annie urged, and when the next giant wave crested, all the children leaped high like flying fish. Suhaila and Annie caught them by their fingertips and pulled them up to the moon. Draping scarves around their shoulders, they swung the children round and round until they could all laugh again, loud and long. Then Grandma Annie paused and whispered, "I taste other troubles." Suhaila tasted the air too, and through tasting she knew more than she had known before. They, the author used the sentence, "and when the next giant wave crested." I wonder what that word could mean, crested. Crested. On the ground below, two sisters climbed down two tall towers that trembled and swayed on quaking soil. "Hang on tight," Annie urged. When the earth stopped shaking, Annie and Suhaila watched the sisters wipe dust from their faces and stick out their tongues to catch some soft rain. "Come bathe and drink with us," Annie invited them. "Will they know what to do, Grandma?" Suhaila asked. "Do they know how to get here?" "Don't worry, honey," Annie reassured her. "They're getting stronger than they realize." Sure enough, Suhaila watched the sisters weave a shimmering spiral and begin to climb. Grandma Annie embraced the young women at the landing. Together they scrubbed themselves clean in falls of mist and drank sweet moon dew from silver teacups. When the sisters were refreshed, they spoke to Annie and Suhaila. "There is still so much to do. There are fires to be tended, gardens to be weeded, and kapok trees to be seeded. We'll work together," Annie promised. "We'll throw in our hearts and minds, and work with our hands to make the land a little more kind." And for sure they would. Together they'd build bridges and buildings and bonds between people. Looking back at the earth, Grandma Annie spoke again. "I feel faith moving the air down there," she said. "They are praying." "For what?" asked Sahelia. "For one another, and for us," Annie told her, "and to make the fighting stop." Setting down her teacup, Suhelia stood and felt it bend, and through feeling knew more than she had known before. Looking past the golden ladder, she spotted people whose hands pointed upward from a synagogue, a temple, a mosque, and a steepled church. One by one, every person was finding his or her own path to the moon, each path connecting with the others in hope's massive stream. The moon crew was getting large now. Everyone sat and traded stories, stories about courage in canyons and discoveries in the desert, stories about people who had lost their languages, and stories about the poor and powerless. "All these people who need us are people just like you and me. Do you see?" asked Annie after the last tale was told. Suhelia washed her eyes and did see, and through seeing knew more than she had known before. Everyone has different languages circling them, different symbols and letters. When Suhelia and Grandma Annie looked down again, they saw a baby boy being born from the center of a stalk of corn. A frail great grandmother left her cliffside home, straightened her stooped spine, and became strong again just long enough to help the baby take his very first step. The importance of maize. Then Grandma Annie watched as Suhelia, all by herself, reached out and took the great grandmother's hand, helping her onto the ladder. Together they climbed, one of them old and one still quite new. All the boys and girls on the moon, all the men and women, were now part of the moon's hum. Their silhouettes could be seen from far below and gave a feeling of plenty to those who had little. Their dancing movements gave feelings of freedom to those who were trapped in small spaces. Those who had been fighting stopped when they heard the moon's song and saw its light filling nooks and streams. Wow. Eventually, Suhelia turned to her grandmother and again nodded twice. Grandma Annie's nose twitched and her lip trembled with love. "I suppose it's time for you to go back?" "Yes," said Suhelia. "Mama misses me, I'm sure. Will you be okay?" "Oh, yes, little pumpkin," Annie replied. "I'm so happy that we had this time." With a snuggle and a smooch, they parted. Looking back just once, Suhelia slid down moonbeams straight into her bed. She sat for a quiet half moment, feeling proud for having helped others heal, for having helped others learn to move forward and upward and around. Together, those of us left on Earth would plant seeds in soft soil. Grandma Annie would send tides to nourish them and weave a net of love around us all. "Mama, I'm home." Suhelia called out into the hallway. "Mama, I met her." "I'm in here, baby. Come, tell me everything." I wonder what's in that cup. What kind of drink is that? hmm Ladder to the Moon. Read to you by Miss Nicole. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.